All right, let's just get right into it. If you've spent, any time at all on social media lately, you have absolutely seen him. I'm talking about those wildly popular cinematic edits of a masked, mysterious figure that everyone calls the Aura King or the Leper King. They're everywhere. Millions of views, incredible music, and just this pure, undeniable presence. But welcome to This Explainer, because today we are going to look past all those 15-second clips and uncover the real, documented history behind the legend.
See, the thing is, most people only know him from those quick aesthetic edits on their feed, or actually maybe from his portrayal in that movie Kingdom of Heaven. But what is the actual historical story of the Ori King? Well, today we're going to break down the incredible reality and the really deep psychology of a man whose sheer presence struck fear into the hearts of his enemies. And as you're going to see, his story starts completely differently than you might expect. Section 1. The Viral Aura King. So before the masks and the tragedy, Baldwin IV was just a completely normal prince in Jerusalem. He loved horseback riding, he loved sword fighting, the whole shebang. But his life was incredibly condensed. He went from a celebrated royal birth and a perfectly normal childhood to commanding armies in these brutal, high-stakes battles by the time he was just 16 years old. And he died at only 24. So how on earth does someone go from a happy royal baby to an absolute historical legend in just 24 years? Well, it all hinges on one really tragic turning point.
Section 2. A terrifying disease.
It all goes back to this single, seemingly normal moment during his childhood that just completely shattered his predictable royal trajectory. It was just a regular day, right? His teacher, William of Tyre, was watching the children play. They were roughhousing, pinching each other, crying out when it hurt, normal kid stuff. But William noticed something totally chilling. Baldwin wasn't reacting at all. He felt absolutely zero pain. Now, at first they thought he was just being incredibly brave, toughing it out. But the royal doctors were brought in, and they uncovered a truth that stunned the entire palace. The diagnosis? Leprosy. Now, look, today this is highly treatable, but back in that era, it was an absolute nightmare. It basically meant progressive numbness, severe physical deterioration, extreme weakness in his limbs, and eventually this devastating facial deformity. His body was literally going to slowly fail him right at the exact moment he was preparing to inherit a kingdom that relied on pure physical strength to survive. Almost immediately, people started doubting if he could ever actually rule. But here is where it gets amazing. While his body decayed, Baldwin absolutely refused to surrender to despair. Instead, he made this conscious, brilliant pivot. He shifted his entire focus from physical strength over to mental dominance. While other princes his age were out there lifting heavy swords and building up their muscles, Baldwin was in the library. He was deeply studying history, politics, and just completely mastering ancient war tactics. He knew his body was going to be weak, so he made sure his mind was absolutely unbreakable.
Section 3. Strategy defeats strength. Okay, so it's one thing to read about war tactics in a palace library, right? But it's a completely different ballgame to actually face down Saladin, a legendary conquering general. And the mismatch here was just staggering. King Baldwin IV, who's just a 16-year-old kid suffering from a debilitating disease, had roughly 375 to maybe 380 knights. Meanwhile, Saladin was marching toward him with an estimated army of 26,000 soldiers. Let's put that into perspective. If you were facing this impossible David versus Goliath scenario, what would you do? Launch a suicide attack? Surrender? Baldwin, he chose strategy.
At the Battle of Montejassard, Baldwin fully understood that terrain is just as important as troop numbers. It's like a giant puzzle. He didn't just meet Saladin in an open field to get instantly crushed. No. First, he waited until Saladin's massive army was squeezing through this super narrow pass between a river and the hills. Because they were packed into this tight choke point, Saladin's expert archers literally couldn't shoot without hitting their own men, and his cavalry couldn't gain any speed. They were totally trapped by their own massive size. And then, Baldwin ordered his handful of knights to launch relentless consecutive waves of attacks.
Strategy proved so much greater than strength. Saladin, this undefeated conqueror, was forced into a chaotic retreat and barely escaped with his own life. This almost impossible victory stunned the entire world. It proved once and for all that a weak body absolutely does not mean a weak man. The enemies of Jerusalem suddenly realized, wow, we are fighting a strategic genius who can literally turn our own massive strengths into fatal flaws.
Section 4. True leadership. But listen, the battlefield was really only half the story. We have to look at the reality behind closed doors. Because while his reputation was soaring out there, his physical body was rapidly, agonizingly collapsing. Over the years, he completely lost feeling in his fingers. Simply riding a horse or even trying to hold a sword brought on just agonizing pain. The disease left him with severe facial disfigurement, which is why he began wearing a cloth or metal mask to hide his decay. But the sheer genius of Baldwin is that he used that mask to remain a constant, stoic presence for his people. He hid his personal agony just to protect the morale of his kingdom. And honestly, this brings us to one of the most powerful takeaways of this whole explainer. A leader's greatest strength is their decisions, not their physical power. His soldiers didn't follow him out of pity. No way. They followed him out of absolute trust. True leadership isn't about flexing muscles or, being the loudest guy in the room. It's about being the calmest, most courageous person in the room when everyone else is utterly terrified. His pure, unshakable presence, that is what people actually mean when they talk about his viral aura.
Section 5, a timeless legacy.
Look, Baldwin couldn't fight his own biology forever. The disease eventually won the physical battle when he was just 24 years old. Let that sink in. 24. An age where most people today are just starting to figure out their careers or, dreaming about their future. King Baldwin IV took his final breath. But by that impossibly young age, he had achieved more than most kings do in an entire lifetime. So, why does this matter to us today? Well, his 850-year-old framework of strategy over strength is directly applicable to our modern lives. Life rarely gives everyone an equal starting line, right? We all face unfair disadvantages. But Baldwin teaches us that whether you're navigating really fierce competition in business, tough relationship challenges, or just building career resilience, your mindset is your ultimate weapon. If you focus on what you can control, your strategy, your intellect, your character, you can overcome almost any deficit. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a final provocative question to chew on. Will people remember your problems, or are they going to remember exactly how you face them? Baldwin could have easily been forgotten as a tragic, sick victim of his circumstances. Instead, he chose to become a legend, turning his greatest weakness into his absolute greatest strength. The true aura of the Leper King wasn't in his crown or his sword, it was in his unbreakable mind. Take that strategy into your own life, and hey, thanks so much for joining me to explore the real story behind